Tim Burton's claymation-style movie Corpse Bride is a charmingly morbid classic, and today we're ranking all of Corpse Bride's characters from good to evil. And as usual, we'll be starting with the good section. The gold medal of good goes to our own lovely Corpse Bride herself, Emily. Emily is put into a curious role for much of the movie. Though she could be painted as the antagonist, she's far too sympathetic to ever truly frighten or anger. She does drag Victor down to the land of the dead thinking he was confessing his love to her, but we sort of get it. This poor woman has been waiting many years for someone to marry her, and then a man comes along, says his vows, and puts a wedding ring on her finger.
I spent so long in the darkness.
From her perspective, it's a totally understandable mistake. We think Emily's most morally corrupt moment is when she learns that the wedding vows did not bind Victor to her because she's dead. Her gut reaction was to ask how she could get him to stay. By doing this, she is fully acknowledging that she knows he would leave if he knew he was free to do so. That makes her request awfully selfish. When she learns the price of the solution would be his life, Emily quickly turns even that decision around. She might want Victor to be bound to her, but she would not even consider killing him to make it happen. She, of all people, understands what a terrible thing that would be to ask of him. He volunteers to give it willingly, and she's so pleased at the prospect of spending her afterlife with him that she's once more blinded. Once again, she comes to her senses before it's too late, at least. When Emily sees Victoria at the wedding, she stops Victor from drinking the poison that would bind them forever. She realizes that while she loves him and wants a happy ending after so long, she would not steal his chance at a life with the woman for whom he was originally intended. The lust medal goes to Emily, not only for how passionately she feels about Victor, but for how she lusts for the life she might have had before it was stolen. What we love best about Emily is that she doesn't seem to hold any of this against Victoria. During the fight with Lord Barkis, you can actually see her wrapping her arm around Victor's intended bride as if to protect her. Let's not forget that Emily saves Victor's life during that same battle. Finally, she makes good on her promise to let Victor go. When he volunteers to marry her anyway, she's resolute in her decision, finding true peace in knowing that she's done the right thing. Emily's story may well be the most tragic in the film, but it's also the most uplifting. She's brave, sweet, and so generous. Just look at the perfect gift she gives Victor for their first wedding. She may be a little naive at the beginning of the film, but it's something that she learns to temper with reason. Taking the silver medal of good is her almost husband, Victor Van Dort. Though Victor is charming in his own clumsy way, we actually think he makes a lot of moral mistakes in the movie. The biggest is that he never comes clean to Emily, not truly. He does try a couple times to explain that he only married her by accident, but he's quick to let the subject change or to let her talk over him. He spends a lot of time running away from her and making a bigger mess by letting her believe that he intends to be her husband. We think one of the cruelest moments of this is when the two of them reach the surface. He knows everything that this poor woman has been through, and he lies to her anyway.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
He leads her to believe that he's going to take her to his parents, while he actually plans to see Victoria behind her back. This hurt her far more than explaining the situation would have, and considering all the lies her previous husband told her, it hurts to see him trick her in such a way. Another great example is when they return to the land of the dead and he shouts that he would never marry her. We know he's bad with words, and it's not what he meant, but he doesn't do anything to make it better. He just lets her keep thinking he could never care for her, all the while failing to explain what actually happened. We know, we're complaining a lot about someone who's taking a medal of good, but we've got one more. Though he does eventually try to comfort Emily, volunteering to make the ultimate sacrifice for her, he only does this once he learns that Victoria has married another man. As kind of a gesture as this seems to Emily, the audience gets the idea that he's only settling for her because she's the only real option left to him. One of the reasons we wanted to explain all of Victor's flaws first is because it's so incredibly satisfying to see him overcome those issues and grow. In the church, when Victoria's husband dies, he makes a really tough call, despite Emily having finally given him the easy out he'd been searching for. He tries to make good on his promise to her. It shows that he's finally learned to care for her as well as seeing something through to the end. It's a tremendous amount of growth and character development to happen over the course of a couple days. It left us with no doubt that he came out of this experience a better person. Taking the bronze medal of good is Victoria Everglot. Victoria may not have developed as well as Emily and Victor, but we don't think she should be overlooked. When the movie starts, she's one of the purest characters. While it gave her fewer crimes over the course of the film, it also didn't give her the opportunity to grow as much as some of the others. This is not to say that she doesn't develop at all, because she most definitely does. She begins the film meek and easy for her parents to subdue. Her love for Victor sparks something in her, because we see her get far more daring. Though none of her plans pan out, and she's eventually forced to marry Lord Barkis, she does try to save Victor from the situation he got himself into, even when he marries another woman behind her back. Following her is Gertrude, alongside her dead husband Alfred. This may be the first time we've ever awarded someone a good slot for violence, but we just can't help it. Let us explain. When the dead start rising up to the land of the living, Gertrude holds her ground against them and is the only person brave enough to do so in such a hands-on manner. To see such a sweet little old lady fight so fiercely was entertaining, but it turns into truly heartwarming when she realizes the skeleton approaching her was her lost love, Alfred. The two share a Gone with the Wind style kiss that shows their love for one another has not faded with time. Behind them is another shared slot, the Black Widow and the Maggot. We think that the Black Widow Emily is friends with is just a little nicer of a character overall, but it's obvious that the Maggot cares about her just as much. He can be discouraging, but we know he's just trying to look out for her.
I have a bad feeling about that boy.
This becomes apparent in the musical number these two characters share with our titular bride, where they try to cheer her up about her fight with Victor. They outline some of her best traits and do all they can to lift her spirits. It makes you wonder if she ever really needed a husband when she has the best support system a corpse could ask for. Following them is Hildegard. There's not a lot to say about Hildegard. She has a small role, but a heart of gold. She's employed by the Everglots to tend to their daughter, Victoria. While there's nothing she can do to prevent the unfortunate match to Lord Barkis, she mourns for her charge's feelings and offers what support she can. We even see her crying at the church when Victoria is forced to marry someone she does not love. Rounding out this tier is the Community of the Dead. Now, there are going to be a few characters we call out in particular later on, but we wouldn't feel right moving away from the good without mentioning that the Community of the Dead overall is very wholesome. The people down there seem tight-knit, joyous, and everything that the land of the living is not. This is most prevalent in the way that they rally behind Emily when she's wronged against, and how badly they all work to give her the special day she's so longed for. With the good section wrapped up, we now move into more neutral territory. These characters fall into the gray area. First up in this tier is Elder Gutnicht. He's a very interesting character and a ton of fun, but he's also a little irresponsible with his magic.
I have it.
When Emily and Victor come asking for a way to get to the surface, there's nothing about the situation that he deems suspicious or worthy of investigation. He's also more than a little abusive to his many birds, seeming to keep them around just for their parts so he can make potions and tasty drinks for himself, apparently. That being said, we're at least putting him at the top of this section because he is responsible sometimes. When the dead try to attack Lord Barkis, he's the one to remind them that it's against the rules for the dead to harm the living. Just under him is Mayhew. Mayhew is a good middle ground for this list. He doesn't have many sins to repent for, he just keeps his head down and goes about his job until it literally kills him. That being said, we know we were happy to see him healthy and thriving in the land of the dead with his dreadful cough finally cured. Up next is the Town Crier. Speaking of people who are just doing their jobs, we have to really admire the Crier's commitment to his duties. Not only is he dedicated to bringing the people the news anywhere at any time, he will not even put down his bell in his terror. His first thought when he sees the dead rising up is to make sure the citizens are all fully warned of the situation. Guy deserves a raise. In a similar vein, there's Emil. He is very good at his job. He is always around when he's needed before he finally decides to quit, saving himself rather than bringing Mr. Everglot his musket. We can't say we blame him too much for that one. Our reason for putting him lower on the list is actually not for leaving the Everglot household, but rather for spending too much time there in the first place. It's clear from the way he disapproves of the Van Dorts, despite being a working man himself, that he's picked up a few too many bad opinions from his employers. Rounding out this tier is William Van Dort. There are other parents coming up, so don't worry, but the only one we think scrapes by as not being bad nor evil is Victor's father, William. William Van Dort takes the Sloth Medal for the way he enables his wife. His biggest crime is never standing up to her, who we'll get around to later on in this list. We considered giving them a shared slot since we see them acting as a team, but decided to spare him since she's mostly the one acting. William is just a fish merchant who happens to be very good at his job and is dedicated to providing for his wife. Finally, we have the bad to evil. These are the characters who had us rattling our bones in terror and rage. Kicking things off is Bone Jangles. Speaking of terror, this jazzy skeleton is the absolute best, except when it comes to minding one's manners as a guest in the land of the living.
I love a woman with meat on her bones.
There are a few questionable things about Bone Jangles that we let slide because his colleagues seem to be okay with it. Using a bandmate's ribs as a xylophone is only creepy if the bandmate in question says it is. We also doubted whether or not it was his place to give Victor Emily's entire backstory, which seems like something that perhaps Emily Emily should have done herself. If we had her tragic past, we're not sure how comfortable we'd be having it sung back to us as a catchy little jazz number. But again, if Emily seems fine with it, we've got to let it slide. He knows better than we do. If there's one thing we do know, however, it's about being among the living. A lot of people would panic if corpses started popping up, and we think Bonejangles is just a little too happy to cause chaos. He's the only deceased person who seems more excited about scaring people than seeing his living relatives. After him is Pastor Galswales. It's probably wrong to say that no one ever likes overly devout priest characters, so we'll only imply it strongly. One negative trait about Pastor Galswales is that he never seems to learn his lesson nor admit that he was wrong. Even the first time we see him, he's getting pretty aggressive with Victor over his vows.
Learn your vows.
It's a pretty violent church that lets its pastors hit grooms over the head for failing to recite something properly. His greatest sin, however, is dragging Victoria back to her parents to be locked up when she comes to seek his help. Her story may have sounded mad, but as a man of God, we don't think it's unreasonable to expect Galswales to be able to guide with a kinder hand. Taking the Bronze Medal of Evil is our final shared slot, consisting of Finis and Maudlin Everglot. They're just awful people, aren't they? The Lord and Lady cannot be bothered with the lower class, except when they must use them to further their own means. Their family fortune has been entirely lost, and they still look down their noses at the family that can save them from their impending doom. The couple puts so much stake in their titles, but are still willing to sell that status to anyone with enough funds. What's worse than their general classist attitude is the way they treat their only daughter, Victoria. They won't give her any comfort nor even false hope about the wedding they arranged for her against her will.
Get those corsets laced properly. I can hear you speak without gasping.
They make no attempt to hide their disdain at the man they're essentially selling her to during the practice ceremony. When she goes off to try and help her groom, they lock her up as if she's mad. Our Pride and Wrath medals go to Maudlin and Finis Everglot, respectively. The two are listed together because while Maudlin is more proud of her title and Finis is quicker to anger, they operate as a pair to bring out the worst in each other. The one thing that saves them from being even lower on the list is that they have a good reason to marry off their daughter. It's a terrible thing to do, yes, but it's literally keeping the family from starving. It was still gone about in a cruel way, but at least it was not entirely needless. Not everyone's motives can be so pure. On that note, the Silver Medal of Evil goes to Nell Van Dort. This might or might not surprise you to see her this far down, but the more we think about this movie, the worse Victor's mother seems. We agree with her message that the nouveau riche are just as good as the old noble families still living in town, but actually take this a step further and say that the poor in the city are better than the nobles or the wealthy, but we digress. What we don't agree with is Nell's vanity.
I always knew I deserved better than a fish merchant's life.
She's willing to do whatever it takes to prove that her family is as good as the Everglots, herself in particular. The lengths that she's willing to go to do this are, well, a little extreme. Victor makes it clear that he doesn't want to be married, and his mother has surely seen how he gets around women. It's one thing to force a child to marry to preserve his one family, but to do it for clout, that's pretty harsh. The way she goes about it is just as bad. Much like her perceived rivals, the Everglots, she does little to comfort her son, whom she's forcing into this situation. In fact, she's always dismissive of him. She tells embarrassing stories about him when he's missing. Worse still, she won't believe the town crier about his mystery woman because she doesn't believe a corpse would want to have him. Being dismissive is not just aimed at Victor though, it's her most defined trait towards everyone. The Envy Medal goes to Nell Van Dort for the obsessive way in which she compares herself and her family to the Everglots. When they first arrive in the Everglots' home, she fawns over how lovely it is, despite her husband reminding her that the house he's provided her with is actually larger. The worst example, of course, is when she runs Mayhew over with the wagon, not even realizing at first that he's died. Talk about insensitive. But first, this video is brought to you by Wicked Binge channel memberships. You can gain access to our videos early before anyone else, plus gain access to members-only emojis and loyalty badges by supporting the channel through a membership. Finally, the Gold Medal of Evil goes to Lord Barkis Bittern. This is just about the only way he could ever win a gold medal for anything, because Lord Barkis is truly the scum of the earth. He takes the Greed Medal, of course, for his Black Widow scheme to claim the fortunes of both his brides. We will also be giving him the Gluttony Medal for the many indulgences he takes along the way, primarily the wine. Finally, we have to give him the Darwin Medal as well. Though Emily was considered for her overly trusting nature for this, Lord Barkis was just too brazen in pushing his luck. When faced with an army of the dead and given flimsy protection, he chose to gloat about his victory rather than take the out and leave. He also chose to drink a goblet of wine when there was clearly poison on the table. He makes Emily fall in love with him before stealing her family's wealth and leaving her for dead. Then he comes back to try to do the same thing with Victoria. This would be bad enough on its own, alone, and more than enough to secure him this spot, but he has to add insult to injury further. He seriously can't even be bothered to try and charm Victoria before their nuptials. Once he knows that her parents will agree to the match, he has no problems showing his true colors to his bride-to-be, whom he plans to kill the second he has a chance. He threatens her life again at the church during what would have been Emily and Victor's wedding. Then, instead of being scared to recognize the first woman he scorned, he takes the opportunity to gloat after her misfortune.
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
Needless to say, we don't feel too bad when he finally gets what's coming to him. Oh well.